Hello, Jeff Sachs here, and welcome to the 6th week of the Marco Polo Drive of Peace, Culture, and Sustainable Development. And look at where we are today. We are standing in front of the 9-story pagoda, which I'm going to tell you about, in the most remarkable site of Dunhuang, which is an oasis in today's Gansu province of China. So if you recall from the previous week, we were in Central Asia. We have crossed from Central Asia into China. If we recall our voyage from the start, we started in the Eternal City, Rome. In the very beginning, the launch, carrying the message of peace of Pope Leo XIV. We went to Venice, the hometown of the Polo brothers, Niccolo and Maffeo, and Niccolo's son, Marco. We went from Venice across the Balkan Peninsula to today's Slovenia, its capital, Ljubljana, to Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, to Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, and to Plovdiv, the second city of Bulgaria. So across the Balkan Peninsula. And from there, we reached the great city, the immortal city of Istanbul, or Constantinople. And we celebrated this place that is formally on one side of the Bosphorus Strait, Europe, and then crossing the bridge into Asia. So in Constantinople, we crossed into Asia, recalling the fact that, of course, the Polos and the two brothers, Niccolo and Maffeo, started their historic trip to Kublai Khan's court from Constantinople. Across from Constantinople into Asia, we went on the northern boundary of Anatolia, which is the southern coast of the Black Sea. Went all across the Black Sea, visiting many famed caravan sites, Samsun, Trabzon, and reached the Caucasus region. That is the region bounded by the Grand Caucasus Mountains in the north, and the Caucasus mountain chain to the south, and in between are the three countries of the South Caucasus: Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. We started our South Caucasus journey in Batumi, a eastern Black Sea port of Georgia, and from there we went to Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, and then across from Tbilisi to Baku, the famed city, an oil center of the world for the last 150 years roughly, on the eastern end of the South Caucasus region and the western side of the Caspian Sea. From Azerbaijan, from Baku, we crossed the Caspian and first reached Aktau, another oil city, this time on the eastern side of the Caspian Sea. And from Aktau went to Nukus, where we visited the remarkable art collection, one of the greatest in the world, collected by Igor Savitsky in the 20th century, of Russian avant-garde art. From Nukus, we went along the great oasis cities of Central Asia, the famed cities of Khiva, Bukhara, and Samarkand, the great cities of today's Uzbekistan, but famed because they were core for the Silk Road. And of course, Bukhara was the place where Niccolo and Maffeo Polo met the ambassador of Kublai Khan, who brought them to the court of Kublai Khan, all the way east to today's Beijing, known then as Dadu or as Han Balik, capital of the Mongol Yuan dynasty. So that was our amazing revisiting this path of the Polos. And from Samarkand, we went to the capital of Uzbekistan, Tashkent. From Tashkent to Almaty, today's great commercial center of Kazakhstan, and then across the Kazakh steppes, most amazing vast grasslands, which of course were exactly the grasslands that connected Asia and Europe for the last 2,000 years. We traversed the Kazakh steppes, not on horseback, but on our 1,000 horsepower BYD electric vehicles. And from stay in Almaty and crossing the Kazakh steppes, we reached the border of China in Khorgos, a place that has a Kazakhstan side and a Chinese side. It's a great inland port. An inland port is a place not on the sea, but it is a port because it's a place of great transit. You have trucks coming in both directions, transiting to rail in both directions. It's a whole vast city that is built as an inland or dry port. From Khorgos, we continued eastward, and this time inside China in Xinjiang province, the most westward province of China, and a remarkable amalgam of civilizations, of Uyghur and of Kazakh peoples and of Han Chinese, all intermingled, as has been true for centuries and indeed for millennia, because this was the Silk Route. And from that stop in Khorgos, heading east, we reached Urumqi, the great city of today's Xinjiang, a remarkable place of economic growth and dynamism, and a key stop on today's 21st century Silk Route. From Urumqi, we continued eastward, of course. This time also an electric vehicle, but by rail, by China's famed electric rail and its fast rail, so that we could head eastward on a rapid basis to arrive at this remarkable place. And I hope many of you know of it and have heard of it, but if not, it ranks among the most remarkable sites in the world. We are in Dunhuang. Now, Dunhuang is in Gansu province, so we crossed Xinjiang to the east and reached Gansu province in China. We're actually in the western part of Gansu, and we could say that we're in the western edge of the core of the Chinese Empire over 2,000 years, because this is a place that has been almost in its entirety under Chinese rule, but it is the western edge, and what makes Dunhuang extraordinary is that it is the connecting point of China, and the core of Chinese civilization, remember, is in central and eastern China along the two greatest river systems, the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, and it connects that great, vast population of China, which is always ranked at the top of the world's population charts together with today's India, the Indian subcontinent. It links the core of Chinese civilization with Central Asia. And Dunhuang is really that linkage. And that's why this place, over the course of 1,000 years, was a cosmopolitan center. It was a center of many remarkable civilizations that came together. So if we think of Rome as a great meeting point, or if we think of Constantinople as that mixing of Europe and Asia, as it has been since its founding as an imperial capital in 325 AD by Emperor Constantine, or we think of Samarkand as a glorious seat of empire of Timur and his grandson, whom I admire so much, Ulugh Bek, the great scientist of the 15th century. We can think of Rome or Constantinople or Samarkand as cosmopolitan centers of the world. Dunhuang is the same. Dunhuang, which you may not have heard of, and I certainly did not appreciate properly until also hearing so much of the history by a brilliant scholar here, Neil Schmidt, who works with the Dunhuang Institute to understand the great history of this site and explain it to Patrick and to me. Well, this is an absolutely remarkable cosmopolitan site because it is the meeting of Han Chinese civilization with Indian civilization, and Indian civilization is also a vast amalgam, so it's a meeting point of Buddhism, it's a meeting point of Hindu civilization, which reached this region by crossing the mountain ranges, the Karakoram mountain range, or what is today's Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, crossing the Pamirs into the Tarim Basin and then heading eastward like we did across Xinjiang. It is a place where Persian culture reached. Persia. Remember how Persia so much influenced every place we have been. The South Caucasus with the vast Persian influences, Central Asia with current day Farsi speakers in Bukhara and Samarkand, but Persian architecture as the masterpieces of Registan Square in Samarkand. Well, Persia reached here. The ancient Sogdians, who were the Persian merchant class of 2,000 years ago, who established the Silk Route 2,000 years ago, reached Dunhuang. You have Turkic influences. You have Christian influences here because Nestorian Christians, the followers of Nestorius, the patriarch of Antioch of 1600 years ago, when they were declared heretical by the formal church of Rome and later Christian Orthodoxy, the Nestorians established Christian outposts and Christian communities in this region. So Dunhuang is a remarkable site. Why did so much concentrate in this particular place? Well, that's partly, in fact, I would say mostly a matter of geography. If you look at a map or you happen to have Neil Schmidt next to you to explain brilliantly the physical geography, there are a couple of points that are most important to understand. First, we're at the western end of the mainstay of the Chinese dynasties over the centuries. Of course, China reached further west into Xinjiang, no doubt, but this was really part of the core of Chinese civilization. We're at the western end, so that's the first point. Second, we're in a desert. Doesn't look like a desert because we are in an oasis, obviously. Why the oasis? I couldn't quite figure it out. It's desert everywhere when we drive in. It's big sand dunes everywhere when we drive in. But the reason is because we are between two mountains here. And being between two mountains, there are glaciers at the top of the mountains. Glacier melt during the spring and the summer leads to seasonal rivers that flow into the valley. That provides the precipitation to make an oasis in the middle of the desert. So Dunhuang is an oasis. So it's the westernmost oasis of the core of China. More than that, the two mountains mean this is a kind of funnel. If you want to make your way here from Central Asia into Western China, into the heart of China, into Shang or today's Xi'an, that was the capital of the Tang dynasty in the 700s and 800s AD. If you want to make your way there or further to the Yangtze or the Yellow Rivers, you have to pass through this valley between these two mountains. So this is a funnel, and it's called the Heshi Corridor. It is the unique east-west corridor connecting Central Asia and the heartland of China, the Heshi Corridor. So who passed here in the 1260s? Niccolo and Maffeo Polo. Who passed here in the 1270s? Those two guys and the son, Marco. They surely passed through this place. In fact, Marco Polo discusses Dunhuang in the voyages because they had to pass through this corridor in order to continue their way east and finally to reach Hanbalik, the capital of the Yuan dynasty. Now, this place was central for China and central for civilization, for the world, and for bringing together Persian and Turkic and Christian and Chinese and Buddhist and Hindu influences for 1,000 years. And one of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons why it remained a central point when the Polos came, and why it is an important point today for the middle corridor that we are traversing, is China's stability as a civilization and as a political system. And I want to make a little digression before I finally turn to the 9-story pagoda and the caves that are all along this wonderful expanse. I want to point out something very fundamental about China and very fundamental in the comparison of China with the Western world. And the point that I want to emphasize is that for roughly 3/4 of the last 2,000 or 2,500 years, China has been a unified polity, a vast, vast geography. Today, China is 9 million square kilometers, so it's a huge country, roughly the same size as the United States in land area. It's been not only a huge geographic entity, but it has been a unified polity. Whereas Europe, you look at just about any year and Europe is in war. And this is a fundamental difference of China and Europe that I think is truly deep and truly helps to explain very different mindsets of Europe and the United States, which is a child of Europe, a toddler, I would say, and China, which is an ancient, now 2,500 year and plus civilization. So China is a unity in most of the period. And let me try to explain 2 reasons why that is. But just to start by saying, the great Chinese philosopher, the most influential philosopher in Chinese history, and I would say together with Aristotle, the two most influential philosophers in world history. Confucius. Confucius was born and lived during a period of disunity. So he lived during a period of the spring and autumn, as it's called, when an ancient unity had already come into collapse. There was still a kind of formal unity under Zhao dynasty, but it was disappearing because there were wars among the city-states, as it were, or the local kingdoms. And Confucius, like many philosophers, went to politician after politician and said, be good, be virtuous. They didn't listen. Fortunately, they wrote down what Confucius said, because the idea of be good is actually the lasting one. Make war is the stupid one. And Confucius's influence was not so big in his political moment, but it lasted for the next 2,500 years as the right approach and the right ideal. Well, a couple centuries, about 300 years after Confucius, a quite brutal conqueror did succeed in conquering all of his competitors. This is Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi. He's known as the first emperor, the founder of the Qin dynasty. And this was, for our purposes, you could say, the first unification of China at a scale that is recognizable as China today. And that was 221 BC. Think of Europe at that time. Rome was doing the same thing. Rome was finishing off its conquests of Carthage. Rome in 146 BC would conquer the Greek city-states. Rome would become a kind of unity of the Mediterranean world in the same way that Emperor Qin established a Chinese unity. But watch the difference of what happens. Well, the Qin dynasty lasted only less than 20 years, actually. Emperor Qin was overthrown and followed by the great Han dynasty, which lasted for roughly 400 years as the great establishment of a unified China after the unification under the Qin dynasty. Just to say quickly, the Han dynasty as a unity lasted for about 400 years. It was followed by around 300 years of return to war, but then China reunified. It reunified under the Sui and Tang dynasties. And from that period, the Sui, the Tang dynasties, and then the Song, the Yuan, the Ming, the Qing, with only small exceptions, China remained a unified polity for a period from roughly 500 to, let's say, the modern day, with some footnotes to add. And so over a period from 500 till today, a period of 1,500 years, China was unified. Now, what was happening in Europe at that time? Rome became the great empire. Rome never fully unified Europe because the Roman emperors, Augustus in particular, in the year AD 9, tried to cross the Rhine River and to conquer what is today's Germany, or what was known as Germania, to the Romans, and the Romans were defeated by the German tribes in the Battle of Teutoburg in AD 9, and they never succeeded in settling north of the Danube or east of the Rhine River. That became German lands, and eventually the Germans conquered the Romans in 476 AD. But let's say Rome established a European unity that lasted for centuries, and a great empire, so great that Rome became the eternal city. It became the place of the papacy, especially when, and precisely when, Constantine converted to Christianity in the year 313 AD after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and then his successor Theodosius in the year 380 AD made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. Rome became the great unified empire of most of Europe and a lot of Asia and North Africa. But unlike China, it was not to last. In 476, Rome fell to the German conquerors, and the difference of China and Europe is that after 476, Europe never became unified again, whereas after around 500 some AD, China remained unified. So this is the fundamental difference of history. And it's a complete difference of mindset, by the way. For China, China is diversity. You have all the ethnic groups, you have the different languages in China, you have the different ethnicities. Doesn't matter. It is harmony in diversity, one of the most famous sayings of Confucian thought. In Europe, it's war. It's Hobbes. It's the eternal war of all against all. Britain and France, they fought for 1,000 years before at least having a temporary truce right now. Or Germany and Britain for the last 100 years until we hope that part is over. But the European mindset, and it became the American mindset, is the world's tough, you fight, it's a war. The Chinese mindset is we are a unity, a vast civilization. And, you know, we can get along with others as long as there's some shared cultural understanding. So I regard this as truly different, as truly a different mindset. I believe that when American political scientists say, well, countries always fight, that's inevitable, we have to prepare for war, and China says, no, we want common civilization, Americans say, that's just cynicism, that's a trick. But I think it's a different mindset, in my own view, that we are really observing. So I want to ask a question. Why did China unify and Europe never unified again after the fall of the Western Roman Empire? Of course, you can imagine how many bookshelves are filled with studies of this idea, but I regard two as being especially important. One is the physical geography, and the second is the institutional cultural makeup. And let me explain my own view of this. One is physical geography. For me, put it very simply, China's a kind of a box. It is a geographic region that is defined on its eastern side by the Pacific Ocean, okay? You can't go beyond that. On the northern side, by mountains and steppe region. So it's the edge of the water supply and mountain ranges. On the east and the southwest, on the west and the southwest, there you have the mountain ranges. And those are delimiting of China's boundaries. So you have the Tian Shan mountain range, you have the Pamirs, you have Karakoram mountain range, you have the Himalayan mountain range. These kind of make the box of the western side and the southwestern side. And then on the southern side, you have the rainforests. Rainforests are big barriers. They are not only physical barriers, but they are disease barriers. When China, on occasion, tried to invade Vietnam, this was hundreds of years ago, mind you, malaria and other tropical diseases pushed these would-be conquerors back. So think of it as a box. Steppe and mountain, or dryland and mountains to the north, mountain ranges to the west and to the south, rainforest on the southern part separating Indochina, today's Vietnam, and so forth, and then the Pacific Ocean. It's relatively secure except from the north, by the way, which is where all the invasions of China came from. They came from nomadic peoples by and large, whether it was Shang in ancient times, whether it was the Manchus who created the Qing dynasty in 1644, invading from the northeast of China. But the only big barrier, only big threat to this box was really from the northern side. And on the western side, the two sides, the Turkic civilizations and the Chinese civilizations, more or less met and stabilized where we were at the Talas River in the Battle of 751, which kind of said, China, you're to the east, Turkic empires, you're to the west, by and large, not perfectly, but that was more or less the end of the political divide. Second factor for China, to me, the most mind-boggling, that I can't really understand it till today, though I've tried my whole life. And that is multiple languages, multiple ethnicities, but one written language that is 2,050 years old now. Not exactly invented 2,250, excuse me, by the Qin emperor, but really engineered when the Qin unified China. What do I mean by that? Well, spoken languages across China differ until today. Shanghainese or Cantonese or Fukienese. These are called dialects, but linguists tell me they're really different languages by any standard, but they're called dialects by Chinese linguists. But they're very different, and they're not so easily mutually intelligible. Everybody reads the same newspaper. How can it be? Because the written language is not alphabetic as it is in most of the world. It is characters, of course, and these characters carry meaning. They are morphemes. They are not alphabets of sound. And by being meanings, they can be read by people that speak different languages. And this was by design of Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi in 221 BC. He had the idea, we need to have royal edicts understood across all of China. There are characters that we use, of course, they were already there. We will standardize the characters. We will have one standardized written language for all of China, no matter what you speak. That was a remarkable idea. Look at Europe. Well, Europe had Latin, which covered a lot of the Roman Empire. It eventually, because of being so diverse, diverged into Italian and French and Spanish and Portuguese and so forth, but also Germanic languages and Slavic languages. There was never one written language that everyone can understand. And I believe, a little bit simplistically, but I don't think I'm wrong, that if you can't understand each other, you don't get along. And so to my mind, the role of a common written script for the last 2,250 years is one of the most brilliant contributions that China made to its own civilization and actually to world understanding, because of all of the consequences that it had in China's own political unity for more than 2,000 years. So, back to Europe. Europe had divided languages. Europe is not a box. It's got the Iberian Peninsula, it's got the Italian Peninsula, it's got the Balkans Peninsula, it's got the Black Sea, it's got the Baltic coast, it's got Scandinavia. You can invade from so many sides. Nobody can control this whole continent. Even the Romans didn't unify all of Europe. It's too diverse geographically. This is a point that the historian E.L. Jones famously made when he wrote about the European miracle. He said something that many historians in the West say, which I don't agree with. He says the dynamism of the West is because they fought each other all the time. You know, you can have dynamism without fighting all the time, so I don't believe that that story is actually right. But I think it does explain why they fight. The linguistic diversity, the ethnic diversity, and the geographic diversity meant that Europe was never unified the same way. Two different geographies, two different cultural histories, and two different mindsets that I think influence us until today. And I like the Chinese mindset of harmony in diversity, and I like the idea that we really all can talk with each other, even if we speak different languages. And fortunately, AI and all of the simultaneous interpretation and smart language models that can do so many languages are going to help us better in that understanding in the 21st century. Well, back to where we are today, Dunhuang. This was the western oasis of this glorious Chinese civilization and the meeting point of Central Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. And everything around us tells us about this glory. We are in the Mogao Caves of Dunhuang. This is a series of caves built into the mountainside for Buddhist, mainly, meditation purposes, built by patrons who wanted Buddhist monks to meditate and pray on their behalf, patrons, wealthy patrons who wanted to show their good deeds, to raise their stakes in the endless cycles of life so that they can reach nirvana. And what developed here is hundreds and hundreds of artistic gems, absolutely remarkable frescoes, temples, sculptures, written manuscripts, by the way, printed manuscripts, because the Chinese invented block printing. And Neil Schmidt tells us that it was the Buddhists who wanted multiple manuscripts. The more you're storing up your karma and your goodwill towards salvation. And so the block printing, we saw the facsimiles of this in a beautiful cave museum here, the Cave of the Library Museum. This dates back to the 9th century. So this was about 600 years before Gutenberg made the printing press in Germany, which was around the year 1440. So here was printing, silks, frescoes, beautiful architecture, temples, and we're standing in front of maybe the most iconic of all of them, the 9-story pagoda. And it is a remarkable site, of course, in and of itself. It's a reconstruction because of an earthquake. It was rebuilt in modern times, but it goes back already to, I believe, the 7th century or thereabouts. It was built by a remarkable person, in fact, a remarkable woman, one of the most remarkable women in Chinese history, because in all of that 2,500-year history that I told you, there has been one, and precisely one, woman emperor. There have been empresses, There have been empress dowagers who ruled because their child, who would be the emperor, was too young, so she was the regent, or she was the de facto ruler while the son was still a child. But we have one woman who said, "I am emperor," and that is Emperor Wu Zetian of the Tang dynasty. And she was apparently pretty tough, pretty gutsy lady. She was a consort of the emperor. She made her way not only as consort, but to be the first consort. Then she made her way to be the empress. The emperor died, and she was, for a time, Empress Dowager. And then she said, "You know what? I'm emperor." And she was emperor, and her rule is known, renowned for its great successes in public administration, and she was a great patron of Buddhism in the Tang dynasty. And so she's remembered not only as the only woman emperor, but as a great emperor of China. Later, she was overthrown because the men weren't having any of it, but she was made history as a great emperor who was a great patron of the arts. And behind the 9-story pagoda is a giant Buddha of her likeness. So it is her own part of reaching Buddhahood and her own commitment to the Buddhahood that we feel all along the Mogao Caves. Thank you for joining in Dunhuang, one of the remarkable places on the planet. Thank you for joining the Marco Polo Drive of Peace, Culture, and Sustainable Development, and we'll see you next week.